In the Second World War, key battles were won and lost in the skies, and whether pilots were dogfighting in Spitfires or flying missions in B-17 bombers, the danger of being shot down behind enemy lines was very real. Our next story is about a day when that nearly happened, if it weren't for a man who followed an extraordinary code of honor. Reg Sherren joins us now with the story on this. Reg.
Peter, sometimes in war, in the middle of the most horrible acts that humans can inflict upon each other, something incredible can happen, a true moment of humanity, if you will. This is not your typical Remembrance Day story, but it's a fascinating one just the same. On an August afternoon, a piece of history comes to town. When a B-17 bomber lands, as it did here in Winnipeg this summer, it always draws a crowd.
Beautiful airplane, but just please watch your head.
People are anxious to see the flying fortress that dropped more bombs on Germany than any other aircraft in World War II. To touch its guns, to remember.
2 500-pound bombs.
Okay. 96-year-old Jack Motier worked arming Spitfires on the British airfields over 70 years ago. Used to watch the big planes, many shot to pieces, coming back. They come in pretty hard shape?
Oh, absolutely. It's just unbelievable. You could see them flying with half the tail fin off, part of the wing missing, and shot up. This B-17 landed, crashed, and came bouncing in, hit the aircraft that was on the ground, and hit the fellow sitting on the wing, took his head off.
Danger and death were never far away. Sometimes it took more than skill or even luck to get you back safely. Sometimes it took something else. This is the story of how one B-17 bomber crew made it home because of the enemy. A story with a Canadian connection. This looks like Africa.
That is Africa.
Haya Stiegler's home is a monument of sorts to her late husband's flying accomplishments.
I mean, Franz flying was his biggest love. Yeah. Whenever he could, he flew. It was his life, his first love.
Father
and mother? His father, mother, and...
Franz Stiegler's life ended in British Columbia, but he was born in the mountains of Bavaria. His father, a World War I pilot. As a young man, Franz and his brother August learned to fly in gliders they built themselves. As they grew up, the Germany they knew was changing rapidly. Adolf Hitler was capturing the imagination of disenchanted Germans.
I think a lot of people were hopeless, and a lot of people probably didn't even realize what was going on.
Hitler reinstituted conscription, soon started a world war, the second in a generation. Military service was not an option. Franz, however, chose to train pilots, and while his brother became a fighting ace, soon his fate would be sealed.
This was right when his brother had been killed.
Mm-hmm. He was allowed to go home.
The death of his brother, shot down by the enemy, affected Franz Stiegler deeply.
Franz never had intentions of shooting down other planes, so being a hot shot, a hero to the nation, that was never part of his goal.
Author Adam Makos knows Franz Stiegler's story intimately, spent years researching it for his book, A Higher Call. He says the death of Stiegler's brother was a pivotal moment in his life.
At that moment, Franz changed as a person because the war suddenly became very personal. He fell victim to that human emotion, the want for revenge.
Start auf einem Feldflugplatz in Afrika.
The newly minted fighter pilot found himself in Africa under the watchful eye of squadron leader Gustav Rodel. Rodel had a strict code of conduct, especially when it came to the enemy. He told Stiegler, "If I ever catch you shooting at a man in a parachute, a downed fighter, I will shoot you down myself." Mako says Rodel added something else.
Franz, it's not for your enemy that you do this. You do this for yourself, for your soul, so that one day, if, God willing, you survive this war, you can live with yourself.
A skilled fighter after Africa, Stiegler served in Sicily and Europe, and while shot down several times, he always survived and was on the verge of achieving the coveted Knight's Cross. Shooting down one more enemy bomber would do it. On the other side of the English Channel, the enemy was putting more bombers in the air every day. A young second lieutenant from West Virginia named Charlie Brown was getting ready to fly his first mission. As a rookie, he and his young crew, most barely 20, would occupy the most dangerous spot in the B-17 formation. On December 20th, 1943, almost as soon as they hit German territory, they were in trouble.
It was a terrible first mission. They were hit before they even got to drop their bombs. So they lost one engine, the nose got blown off. They drop their bombs, they fall out of formation. Another engine falls off. Next thing you know, the German fighters swarm this plane. It was 15-1.
B-17 out of control at 3 o'clock.
As luck would have it, Charlie Brown lost control and his plane fell through the sky, losing their fighters but just barely avoiding a crash. But that's when Franz Stiegler got them in his sights.
Every foot of the bomber had a hole. He looks down the tail, and there he sees the tail gunner. He sees the gunner is slumped over them. His head is practically missing, and the blood is actually streaming down the barrels of the guns.
In that moment, depicted here by artist John D. Shaw, Franz Stiegler, seeing the big bomber is crippled, commits an act some would call treason, punishable by death. After looking his enemies in the eyes, he decides to save them.
And he says, this bomber with these 9 or 10 men aboard is the same thing as a man in a parachute. And he remembered that lesson from the desert. But when he saw the wounded men on that bomber, saw their eyes, suddenly he saw his brother's eyes. He saw his brother's face. He saw his brother's last moment. And he realized that he was about to kill men just like someone had killed his brother in a way.
And he couldn't do it.
And he couldn't do it.
Instead, Stiegler escorts them right across German lines, staying just off the big bomber's wing so anti-aircraft guns wouldn't fire, then leaving them with a salute to limp back to England. Upon landing, Charlie Brown tells his incredible story, but not for long.
And the intelligence officer said, wow, this is incredible. I'm going to run this up the flagpole. And sure enough, the same intelligence officer comes back an hour later with a different look on his face. He's not happy. He says, Charlie, you can't tell anyone what happened. The brass is putting a lid on this thing.
No medals, no recognition.
Exactly. They didn't want word of this to get out.
Brown would survive 26 more missions, finally getting to celebrate the end without ever speaking another word about the German fighter pilot who saved his crew. Franz, too, would survive the war, only to emigrate to Canada looking for work.
No, that is from the Queen's Journals mainly.
Marrying Haya, becoming a proud Canadian citizen, initially working in the logging camps where he was accepted as an equal.
That's why he went to Canada. And Canada, he had no problem. He always loved Canada. He always loved Canada.
But he never forgot that American bomber crew.
He says, you know, I always wonder, because he couldn't talk about it before. And he says, I wonder what happened to that plane, whether they made it back to England. He always wondered.
Decades passed until one day Franz picked up a German military newsletter only to find a B-17 pilot named Charlie Brown was trying to find him. They exchanged letters, and on June 21st, 1990, in Seattle, Washington, 57 years after that fateful day, the two former combatants met. This footage was shot by a friend.
I was so happy as we met that I dropped him and hugged him. Wasn't easy.
It was an emotional moment for Franz Stiegler.
I love you, Charlie.
The two became best friends, traveling the country, speaking at different functions. Charlie Brown's nightmares of that fateful day stopped, and he eventually was awarded his country's second highest honor for his actions that day in 1943. Franz and Charlie both died in 2008, just 8 months apart. Franz Stiegler never got his Knight's Cross, but as he often said, he got something much better. And Peter, while researching the book, author Adam Makos found a private note that Franz Stiegler had written to Charlie Brown. In part it reads, "In 1940, I lost my only brother. Just before Christmas, I had the chance to save a B-17 from her destruction. The pilot Charlie Brown is for me as precious as my brother was. Thanks, Charlie." Quite the story. Peter?
Man, I'll say. Thanks, Reg. Reg Sherren. Well, you saw author Adam Makos there in Reg's story. He detailed the story of Franz Stiegler and Charlie Brown in a book. A Higher Call was published last year and spent 19 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It's now being published in France, Poland, Hungary, and yes, Germany. The film rights have also been picked up by Academy Award-winning writer Tom Stoppard.